Hi class, it's Susan again, and here we are looking at the material for week 9 in the Philosophy 101 class. So we're still basically in the 18th century. So let's look at some of the things that are brought up in the readings this week. So first and foremost, I want to say we're still continuing on our exploration mostly of epistemology, but also some questions this week about the role of identity. Immanuel Kant is unique, German Prussian philosopher who comes up with an idea which combines both a priori and a posteriori forms of knowledge as a way of understanding reality. We also have some interesting articles, one by John Locke and Reid, about what makes up our personality or what constructs our identity. So then it goes back into this question of what is consciousness? How does consciousness play a role? So here's another idea for you to mull around in your mind. Do you think that our personalities are solid entities, or are they fleeting constructs? Are they always being reinforced and shaped? Do you think consciousness is an essential element to our personalities? According to Reid, does our understanding of our personal identities rely on our ability to remember events and experiences? Because then what would that mean if somebody had an injury to their brain and couldn't, or had suffered trauma and wasn't able to remember anything? So this is a really interesting philosophical question. What is the role of memory in the construction of our identity? If we don't remember things that happened to us in the past, how does that shape us or not shape us? Okay, sort of the overarching theme for the class is to keep coming back to evaluation of arguments. So here's another perspective on a new way to evaluate arguments. So the author Govier has an idea, and it's a female philosopher, and she says that if you're going to evaluate arguments, that you should look at three methods of analysis and different arguments. So she says the A rule is that a good argument should have acceptable premises. So that should be the first thing that you look at. The R rule is that a good argument has premises that are relevant to its conclusion. And the good, or the G rule, is a good argument has premises that provide good grounds for the conclusion. So what do you think of if you used this ARG methodology? Let's look at this argument. And I want you to notice it's set up so that you can see it has three premises, and the fourth statement is the conclusion. We see that very clearly with the therefore, comma, which is a conclusion indicator. Science admits to having no final answers, while religion claims to have final answers. So, the methods of science and religion are diametrically opposed. Thirdly, science has helped to liberate the human spirit, whereas religion would stifle the human spirit. Therefore, there can be no meaningful reconciliation of science and religion. So what do you think about that argument? Do you think 1 through 3 are acceptable premises? Is there any one that you were going to reject? Do you think that there's a solid relationship between the premises and the conclusion? Right? So what we're always trying to look at is the relationship between the premises and the conclusion. Okay, let's look at another one. This argument is attributed to Bertrand Russell. Both younger and older children left to themselves can easily come to physical harm. Secondly, older children left to themselves often are very annoying to adults. Third premise, so children simply cannot be left to do as they please all day long. Or we could say that's the first conclusion, and the second conclusion is therefore there must be some element of discipline and authority in education. What do you think? What do you think about the arguments? The premises, are they acceptable? Are they relevant to the conclusion? Okay, so the other thing to keep coming back to is, can you identify arguments and things that aren't arguments? All right, so let's look at this first statement, or this first the reaction of many people when they first hear a description of psychopathic personality is that they have known a few people who fit the bill: fellow workers, classmates, acquaintances, bosses, even perhaps, unfortunately, a spouse. Is that an argument? Is number one an argument? How about number two? Never cease loving a person and never give up home for him. For even the prodigal son who has fallen most low could still be saved. The bitterest enemy and also he was your friend could again be your friend. Love that has grown cold can kindle again. Soren Kierkegaard. If a diet does not work, then that is the problem. But if a diet does work, there is still a problem because the diet will have altered the dieter's metabolism. An altered metabolism as a result of dieting means a person will need less food. Needing less food, the person will gain more weight easily. Therefore, dieting to lose weight is futile. And then finally, number 4, a computer then calculates the patient's bone density. Readings are compared to those of a standard for people of the same age, sex, and body type. I hope you can see that 1 and 4 are not arguments and 2 and 3 are. So when you have a clear argument, you need to have at least one conclusion and one premise. Okay, back to David. We're revisiting David Hume. So a couple of things we know about David Hume's epistemology. It rests on 4 assumptions. Every claim that something exists is a factual claim. He would say true. Secondly, factual claims can be established only by observation or by causal inference from what is observed. Again, David Hume would say this is true. So if we say every claim is a factual claim, and factual claims can only be established by observation or by causal inference, the third is true or false. Thought, knowledge, belief, conception, and judgment each consist in having ideas. What would you say? David Hume would say true. And finally, all ideas are derived from and are copies of impressions of sense or inner feelings, that is, perceptions. True. So everything about his worldview is saying we can observe. We might not be able to observe cause and effect, but we can observe, and really, even ideas are habituated from our perceptions of the exterior world. So again, this was the quote that I alluded to last week. So this is the mind is a kind of theater where several perceptions successfully make their appearance, pass, repass, glide away, and mingle in an infinite variety of postures and situations. Okay, so this week, probably the most influential, after Plato, Aristotle, and Descartes, I would argue one of the most influential philosophers in Western philosophy is Immanuel Kant. So what he did, which was kind of unique, is he created an epistemological bridge between a priori and a posteriori knowledge. So he was one of the few people to say, not like Plato and Descartes, who said knowledge is rational. It is primarily a priori. Or not like David Hume, who said it's primarily a posteriori or empirical. He said there's a little bit of both. First, he says that a priori knowledge, it's necessary, it's universal, and it can be understood through analytic judgments or through synthetic a priori knowledge. So, the analytic judgment is where the predicate and subject are connected through identity. So this whole idea of, you know, that a bachelor is an unmarried man, that's an analytic judgment. A synthetic judgment is where the predicate and subject are connected but without identity. And they tend to be to amplify or make connections about something. So two different ideas related to synthetic judgments. The first thing that Kant would say is that all empirical judgments are synthetic. When I look, I'm in my office at home, the walls are blue. My claim that the walls are blue is a synthetic judgment, right? I don't know what color your walls are. But he does say that some synthetic judgments are a priori, like the idea that 5 plus 3 is always 8. We don't have to observe that to be real. We know that it's true, and it can be true without any experience of 5 and 8. Excuse me, 5 and 3 being 8. So this first sentence, synthetic knowledge is ampliative, means that synthetic observations expand on or add to the sense of meaning. So in the bachelors or unmarried men, we can see that that's just kind of straightforward. Nothing is being added to. It's just an analytical definition. Whereas if we say bachelors are lonely, right? Are we making an observation about unmarried men being alone, being lonely? That's adding to the observation. So Kant said that we do have some limitations, and knowledge is limited to phenomena. And phenomena are objects that we can experience, and all of these objects must be present in time and space. So wherever you're sitting, or maybe you're lying down and you're listening, you're surrounded by objects that are present in space and time. So that's one level of knowing. There's these things, and we can observe them. But he says there's also a field of noumena, that these are things that are outside experience. So he includes in this category speculative reason, a lot about math, and the idea that humans can act as moral agents. We're going to see a little bit later on when we get to ethics that Kant's ideas about what determines that something is ethical is not connected to the consequence. So he comes up with a reasoning method for establishing what's ethical, which isn't related to observable phenomena. So this last term at the bottom of the slide, das Ding in sich, is a German phrase that means the world of the thing in itself. So he says we have a kind of a priori guide that filters our perceptions of the world and helps us understand things. But even given that, and we're observing things in our reality, in the observable world, in some ways we can never know the thing in and of itself, because there's some kind of noumenal reality that we can't know about things. I've always found this kind of interesting because to me it's related to this idea, it doesn't matter how close you are to someone, what kind of relationship you have, you can never really know that other person. You can never really know another person. You can't really know another species. It's kind of like that article about what's it like to be a bat. We can never really know. So Kant is quite unique in this combining of a priori and a posteriori methods for knowing the world. So back to John Locke. Now, this is kind of interesting to me because John Locke in this article on identity seems to be trying to make an argument for the existence of the soul. So he says that identity is consciousness alone, and that he is a materialist who is kind of trying to make an argument or room for the immortal soul. Now, this was what I thought was the most interesting part of the article. Towards the end of the article, he asked the question, what does it mean when we say someone is not himself or beside himself? Now, he was saying if someone is not himself, that means there is a self and there's also not a self. So the same man has two personalities. It says, trick of language. What language reveals about our thoughts on things. And finally, another Scottish philosopher from the 18th century, Thomas Reid, and he was a critic of Hume and Locke's empiricism. He says that identity is a relation. It supposes an uninterrupted continuance of existence, and that personal identity implies the continued existence of that indivisible thing I call myself. He wants to say there is a self. It's not mutable. It's not just a trick of the mind. It's not a theater. It's actually an entity of some sort. He's saying the self is this something that thinks, acts, and feels, but the self isn't synonymous with the feelings or the actions or the thoughts, but it is the thinker. It is the conscious, metacognitive self who is able to do all of these things. What do you think about that?